Hey guys, it's Chris, and the day has come. They have dropped the full House of the Dragon trailer for Season 1. Let's skip all the bullshit and jump right in. This is what you're here for. Let's break this thing down shot by shot. And we open up with Rhaenyra Targaryen walking in to see her uncle Daemon sitting on the Iron Throne. This looks to be young Rhaenyra, so this is a time before she was probably named heir, and Daemon thinks he is the heir to the Iron Throne because he essentially is before Viserys actually names Rhaenyra his heir to the Iron Throne, which comes later when Daemon pisses him off. They did have a few quarrels in the family, and there were times when they were mad at each other, but he always accepted his brother back. So at this point, Daemon is basically contemplating his future, sitting on the Iron Throne, and Rhaenyra does the same here. Although, of course, they end up on the same team and later married because Daemon wants to get as close to the Iron Throne as possible. So Daemon's going to likely be the main character, essentially, in this story. He is both good and bad, and I think he'll definitely be a fan favorite. Now, next we have a shot of Viserys, and by the way, this is who is narrating over this trailer. This is his narration, and throughout he's talking about he had this dream of sitting his heir on the Iron Throne, and this is to illustrate some of the pressure of, who to name as his heir. And as we see later in the trailer, he doesn't want to choose between his brother and his daughter. This next shot, we have two people. I can't really tell who this is. It looks like we have maybe a White Cloak here, so I'm thinking this may be Sir Criston Cole and Rhaenyra, young Rhaenyra, riding somewhere, because he does become her personal protector, and later on he would kind of switch sides and end up on Alicent's team, Team Green. But that's what's going to be outstanding about this show, is we have all these relationships that change over time, where a lot of these people started out really, really close. Rhaenyra had a thing for Sir Criston Cole, possibly, as rumored at least, and maybe even for her Uncle Daemon. So we'll see a lot of precedent set up in this first season of how these relationships start off of everybody being pretty close, all that kind of thing, and then of course power comes into play, and all that changes. The next shot, we see the tourney at Maidenpool, or whatever they combine this with. This may be at Horn Hill where they combine some of these tourneys, but this is where Daemon and Criston Cole actually fight here, these next couple shots. We're going to see Daemon lose twice to Sir Criston Cole, and this is before he's Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. He loses to him here in the melee with his Morningstar, and then again in the joust, and then he gains the favor of Rhaenyra, Sir Criston Cole does, and she's apparently so smitten with him that she asks King Viserys, her father, to make him her personal protector, and so he obliges. And I think we see another scene with them here shortly. So this sets up a little bit of animosity between Daemon and Sir Criston Cole. You'll see a lot of little parallels here with the whole entire story with these individual shots where two people in the shot were once pretty close in some way, at least had some decent relationship, ended up on different sides of the war. Now this shot here I think follows this up because I believe right here we have a young Rhaenyra in the background, and then we have, I believe, Sir Criston Cole here. The reason I say that is over here it looks like to be Kingsguard armor. He was on the Kingsguard before he became Lord Commander as well, but this is not Dark Sister. This looks to be a regular sword here of some sort, and it's rumored that they may have had a relationship, although he does have vows of celibacy. It's rumored that he broke those, and the other half, of course, like Mushroom, for example, in Fire and Blood, says that she is the one who went after him. So we're not really sure if any of that happened at all, but that's what's going to be great about this show, is we get all the gritty details about what actually happened, how these relationships actually went down, if at all. The truth will finally be revealed. Now, this is a cool shot as he finishes his little speech about placing his heir on the Iron Throne. The cool thing here is you see blood on his finger. He gets cut here. Everybody that sits on this throne metaphorically and literally gets cut. And apparently in Targaryen history, there's been kings that's actually died from wounds of the Iron Throne. Viserys II, Dany's father, the Mad King, was called King Scab for a time because he had so many cuts from sitting on the Iron Throne. So this is not only a physical thing, but obviously a metaphor for what this does to people. We have a nice shot here of what I believe is Rhaenyra on her dragon Syrax. Syrax is described as having yellow scales, and this is likely her going to the dragon pit. So you see the dragon pit up here in King's Landing. This is obviously before Game of Thrones, before it got destroyed, and this is when it was in normal operation, what it actually looked like before we saw it in Game of Thrones. And this was kind of the downfall of the Targaryens before the actual Civil War, because they started keeping their dragons in captivity, and that's when we hear about in history where they stopped growing, and many were starting to go downhill as far as being hatched smaller and sickly and all that stuff that we heard about in Game of Thrones. And of course we learned in Game of Thrones from Dany and Jon and all that stuff in their conversations is this is what caused all this, instead of letting them roam free. Now, not every single dragon was kept here, but most were during their reign in King's Landing. Then we have some great shots of the city here. As you can see, as I said before, you see the dragons everywhere. So this city is going to look a lot different as far as what we saw in Game of Thrones. Obviously, this is during the height of Targaryen power, so they put dragon shit everywhere. But it really looks outstanding. Now, in this next shot here, we see King Viserys putting this little ball in this little holder, so I'm not exactly sure what this is. It looks to be some big glass eye type of thing, but you look here at the next shot here during the small council meeting here in King's Landing in the Red Keep. We see King Viserys, Otto Hightower as well, Corlys Velaryon, who is the master of ships at this point, the maester, etc., and they all have this little thing in front of them with this little ball thing in it. So we see also Rhaenyra here on the side as she looks to be serving. She was kept around court and all that, essentially groomed for the Iron Throne before she was even named heir. So I don't know what these little things are or why they put that little shot there of him putting that little ball thing in this little ashtray. So anybody has any ideas, let me know in the comments for sure. And then we have a shot of Otto Hightower here in the same meeting. Now, Otto Hightower is always bringing up succession to King Viserys. At one point, even, Viserys has heard this from Otto Hightower so much, he even fires him and sends him back to Old Town. Otto Hightower's primary objective here during this show will be to keep Daemon Targaryen away from the Iron Throne because he believes he's so terrible, he'll be another Maegor the Cruel. We see this gorgeous shot here of the tourney we're talking about before, and this is probably going to be Maidenpool or maybe Horn Hill. We're not exactly sure because we don't know if they're combining these. But if you remember the original teaser, we saw all the House Tarly banners as well, as if they were the hosts of this thing. During the time of Viserys I, there was a lot of tournaments taking place, there were a lot of parties, etc., and the realm was in general peace. We'll definitely see Daemon losing to Sir Criston Cole here, as we saw in the previous shots. And this is where Sir Criston Cole gains the favor of Rhaenyra Targaryen. So these next couple of shots, we see Daemon riding with his joust, looking up in the stands. And this is another shot here. Now, this could be the same tournament. I'm not 100% sure, but this is young Rhaenyra here, and she is wearing red. The next shot we saw a little bit of in the first teaser, just a further away shot. This is young Rhaenyra, obviously, with Laenor Velaryon, her first husband. Now, this is going to be a major plot point that kind of starts all this off as well, because apparently Laenor actually prefers the company of men, and their children do not look Valyrian. They're kind of described as plain-looking with brown hair, and of course it's rumored and likely true that she had an affair during this time period since her husband was gay with Sir Harwin Strong, otherwise known as Breakbones. Then as we see a quick shot of Daemon in the City Watch as he joins the City Watch after he's been kicked off the council, essentially because Otto Hightower wants him to be kept away from the king. Viserys assigns him to be Lord Commander of the City Watch. He actually brings a little bit of honor back. He gives them new weapons, new armor, and golden cloaks, and from this point on, they are called the Gold Cloaks, as we saw in Game of Thrones. And then we jump right back over to the council meeting here, where we hear Sir Otto Hightower talking about succession again. This is all he ever talked about. And Corlys Velaryon jumps in and says the king has an heir. It's Daemon Targaryen, his brother, because Corlys Velaryon and Daemon are pretty close friends, and of course we'll see them fighting together in the War for the Stepstones. Then we see a couple more shots of the Gold Cloaks, and then we hear Viserys say, "I will not be made to choose between my brother and my daughter." So he was kind of indecisive about things, but then eventually Daemon kind of pissed him off, and he does name Rhaenyra heir to the Iron Throne. We see a few more shots of the Gold Cloaks when Daemon takes over, and then we see a shot of Rhaenyra and Sir Harold Westerling, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard at this time, looking down upon some houses here. Now, I believe this is going to be the same room that becomes the map room later in Game of Thrones. Now, I could be wrong because King's Landing is a big place, but I think it would be cool to show some of those similar rooms where later on Cersei has the map of Westeros painted on the floor. We see various houses here that's going to swear fealty to her. This is probably after she's been named heir to the Iron Throne. I'll notice really quickly there's a couple of houses here. House Mallister from the Riverlands. This is the blue background with the white bird. Also notice House Tarly on the right. So all these houses will be made to come swear fealty to Rhaenyra as the next heir to the Iron Throne. We see a shot here from the same scene. This is Sir Criston Cole again. The young and dashing Sir Criston Cole that we'll see. Does he like Rhaenyra? Does Rhaenyra like him? Does he ignore his vows? That's going to be a little interesting tidbit that we see some of these subplots as well, of all these different lovers and crushes and what really happened according to Fire and Blood. We see this nice shot here of two dragons. I can't tell you exactly who these dragons are. I would imagine we're going to see a lot of Caraxes, which is Daemon's dragon. He is a red dragon, otherwise known as the Bloodworm. And obviously we're going to see a lot of Rhaenyra and Syrax is described as having yellow scales. But we'll also see Vhagar and Sea Smoke, perhaps Moon Dancer. Meleys was ridden by Rhaenys, so this could be Meleys here because Rhaenys may take part in the War of the Stepstones. But obviously I can't really see clearly there in this shot, and I'm colorblind as hell. Speaking of Rhaenys, we now see Rhaenys with her husband Corlys Velaryon here, and she is saying Rhaenyra's succession will be challenged. She knows how it is because she's been through this before. She was the one bypassed during the Great Council of 101 AC, and her son as well, and they overwhelmingly voted for Viserys over Rhaenys. So she's been through this before. Her family's been through this, and she knows what's coming. This is why she gives advice to Rhaenyra, as we see later on. Next here, we have a shot of Daemon coming into the throne room here to face his brother, the king, and he's immediately stopped by the king's guard and looks down. As you can see, at this point, they were probably mad at each other, but it looks like he may have a crown on here, and this is likely where he'll offer his crown of the Stepstones to his brother Viserys to get back in his good graces. And now we see a couple shots here of Queen Alicent, or Alicent as she becomes queen. Of course, she came to court only because her father, Otto Hightower, was hand of the king, and she actually took care of Jaehaerys, the good king. She was his caretaker until he died. He actually died while she was reading to him, so she's been at court for a long time. But then later on, Viserys remarries and marries her. So Alicent and Rhaenyra being pretty much BFFs for their whole lives, things start to change when she marries her father and then has children with him, and that's what starts to change everything in regards to who will sit the Iron Throne. And there you go right there. We have this next shot here of Daemon and Viserys here talking. I've decided to name a new heir, and he says, I am your heir. So this is when he names Rhaenyra heir to the Iron Throne and tells Daemon his plans to do so, and this pisses Daemon off, and the only reason he does it is because Daemon has already pissed him off. I won't get into all the details for spoiler's sake, but this is going to put a splinter between them, although eventually he will come back and offer his crown of the Stepstones to his brother to make peace. See a couple shots here of Dragonstone and what we saw in the previous teaser where Daemon pulls his sword on Sir Otto Hightower and some of the Kingsguard because he's trying to send a dragon egg with his pregnant concubine, Lady Misery, otherwise known as the White Worm. He wants to send a dragon egg that he's stolen from Dragonstone with her across the Narrow Sea because his brother ordered her to leave. But he tries to steal the dragon egg we saw in the previous teasers and photos to send it with her because she is pregnant at the time. And Viserys sends the Kingsguard and apparently Sir Otto Hightower, at least in the show, down to stop him from taking the dragon egg because that is a no-no. Dragon eggs are very, very important to Targaryens. Obviously, it's what maintains their power. Now, this next shot kind of confirms, I believe, what I thought to be the case earlier with the young Rhaenyra and Sir Criston Cole in the same room. She is asking Criston Cole, do you think that the realm will accept me as their queen? Now, at this point in time, Sir Criston Cole, again, is probably her personal protector. We'll see if they had any, personal relationships. We'll see what's going on with that. Get all the juicy details. So again, at this point, he is her personal protector as regarded by King Viserys after her request after the tournament. And we'll see how their relationship changes after Queen Alicent has a son of her own, Aegon. Now here's the same little scene we saw in previous teasers as well with Rhaenys talking to Rhaenyra as well, basically giving her story on what she went through. She was bypassed, and now even though she's named heir, they will never let her ascend the Iron Throne. So she's giving her advice here. And the next scene here, we see an older Rhaenyra, but then we see her, the younger Rhaenyra, still talking to Rhaenys, and she's saying, when I'm queen, I will set a new precedent. But of course, that's going to be a bit of a struggle, and we'll see what happens. And of course, as she finishes her line here, we see the shot here of her flying her dragon Syrax. Now, keep in mind also, to season 1, you're going to see a lot of dragons flying around, a lot of different riders, but there won't be a lot of war except for the War for the Stepstones. We'll talk about that in a second. But remember, Targaryens, who are dragon riders, they just fly around like other people ride horses, so you'll see them going to and from on dragons all the time, and their relationships with their dragons as well, because they're all unique and bonded in some way. Next, we start to see the War for the Stepstones here, so we have various scenes from battle here. This is going to be where we see some of the first battles of this show, although it's not going to be the actual Civil War itself. That'll come later. So this is when Daemon decides to take over the Stepstones, and Corlys Velaryon helps him because it's going to help him out with his taxes, being that he's a seafaring family, and at this point in time, the richest house in Westeros. So a lot of shots here of them fighting the Triarchy, called the War for the Stepstones. And this is where we're going to see our first dragon action as well. So we got a couple shots here from that war, as well as Daemon flying Caraxes, the Bloodworm, actually raining down fire on the Triarchy here. And I think it's going to be really interesting. Will they use the word Dracarys when they tell their dragons to burn things like Dany had to? Remember, in these days, they had been doing this for centuries. Dragons were still around. They were bonded. They could have just done what they were thinking because they were kind of blood bonded. But Dany had to kind of relearn all that stuff, and she actually said Dracarys, as we saw in Game of Thrones. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how these Targaryens during this time, at the height of their power, interact with their own dragons. We see the shot here of the dragon egg we saw previously. It is on heat here, so they're trying to hatch this thing. This is what they did. They didn't really understand at this time how they did it. Sometimes it just happened, but they tried to put them on heat. As we saw later, Dany tried to do that as well, and she had the right idea. She was just missing something, which was, of course, was the blood part of Fire and Blood. We see a great shot here of Daemon and Caraxes close up for the first time. Again, Caraxes' nickname was the Bloodworm because of his red coloring, and it looks like we see some kind of saddle on him here. This is what I really think is cool. There's some kind of armor slash saddle thing strapped around him here. And so that's what we were wondering about before. We had talked about it on live streams as well. Would they have saddles in the show? We hadn't seen any during these teasers, but this looks to be something strapped around Caraxes. During this time, and from the books at least, all these dragon riders had saddles, and that's what makes sense to me. So I think it's really cool here. We see something at least on him, some type of saddle thing or something to hold on to and sit on these damn dragons. I think it only makes sense, as opposed to Daenerys, who in Game of Thrones was the first dragon rider in 100 years, so she didn't really have all those options and know exactly what to do. She had to learn as she went. Then we just see a couple more shots of dragon, and then a dragon in the subterranean layers of Dragonstone. This is where most of those dragons roosted. Queen Alicent in the throne room, as we hear the voiceover from Alicent as well, saying basically that if Rhaenyra comes into power, she could cut off any challenge to her succession. And I believe Alicent here is talking to her son Aegon. This is obviously going to be Aegon the Second Targaryen, and at this point she may be trying to convince him to take the Iron Throne for himself, that he's the true heir because he is the son of the king now, and that should override her, although before she was on her side and her BFF. You see how the politics come into play during the show. We see a couple more shots of the gold cloaks and a dragon. I believe it's going to be Caraxes again diving, because we're going to see the War for the Stepstones. Then we see the other side of the coin here, where Rhaenyra is a little bit older now, and she's talking about Queen Alicent. She would block my way because she is the heir to the Iron Throne. So now you see them both talking behind each other's backs, where they used to be best friends. Then our next shot here, we see our first look at Aemond Targaryen, the son of Queen Alicent and Viserys I, after he remarried to her. Now, it looks like this is just training here because people are standing around watching, so I don't think this is an actual fight. Now, Aemond Targaryen has a big part to play, especially in the very beginning of the war that we'll probably see in later season. But Aemond actually rides the dragon Vhagar. Vhagar is a very famous dragon, considered to be the second biggest ever next to Balerion the Black Dread. And Vhagar was described as bronze with greenish blue highlights and bright green eyes. So we should see Vhagar, his dragon, the biggest dragon at the time in Westeros. We see shots here of young Rhaenyra again and young Alicent when they were still close. And then we hear the voiceover, "Our hearts remain as one," and then somebody says, "Our hearts were never one." And then immediately we see the next shot where they're older now and they're sitting really far apart from each other, very much separated. So this is obviously very symbolic of their relationship and their friendship, where they were once very, very close BFFs, and now they're on opposite sides of what will become the War for the Iron Throne and the Dance of the Dragons itself. Next, we see some great shots from the War from the Stepstones. We see Sir Corlys Velaryon here in battle. A quick shot of Rhaenys talking to Alicent about imagining herself on the Iron Throne. We see a dragon flying over Sir Otto Hightower. This looks to be on Dragonstone, probably when he confronts Daemon here. This is likely Caraxes again. We do see some red here. If you pause it, looks like some red in his wings. So this is Caraxes coming to the rescue here of Daemon, because he probably senses he's in trouble or about to get in a fight. And then we see a Baratheon. This should be Boros Baratheon. We see the Baratheon shield here in King's Landing. They all will have some small part to play in this story, as the entire realm chooses their side, black or green. Then we see some shots we've seen before from the previous teasers, and then some more shots from the War of the Stepstones, where they're going to hammer men down and let the tide come in. You see all the crabs there. This is a guy called King Crab. I won't go into any spoilers here. It's going to be a very cool thing here to see at the War of the Stepstones. And then next we see Daemon burning people here during this big battle for the Stepstones here. So this is going to be the first real dragon action in battle we see probably during the show during Season 1. And a close-up shot of Aemon 1 out here talking to what looks like to be Sir Criston Cole. They will end up being obviously Team Green. And there in these next few shots we hear Alicent talking about duty and sacrifice as she points the knife to Rhaenyra. Now, I think she's actually blocking it from one of her children. We see some clothes coming off. Obviously, this would not be a Game of Thrones show without some debauchery. And then we hear Rhaenyra say to her, "Now they see you as you are." They are full-blown enemies from this point on, and let the Dance of the Dragons commence. In our very last shot, we have a dragon here. And again, I'm colorblind, so this could be Syrax. I don't know if I see yellow in there. Also, looks like I see red at the same time. The Syrax was described as yellow scales, and this is Rhaenyra's dragon. This would mimic the poster that we saw earlier, Rhaenyra standing in front of her dragon Syrax. So let me know in the comments which dragon you think this is. And that is all we have from our first full trailer from House of the Dragon that starts in just about 4 weeks now, 4.5 weeks or so. So let me know what you think in the comments below. As usual, thank you for all the support, especially you guys on Patreon. And a huge shout out to my executive Patreon Smokescreen producers. And of course, if you dig what I do here, give these videos a like, comment, and a share. Hit that subscribe button. And of course, join us for our live streams on Sunday nights after the show, as we'll do that as we did back in seasons 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones. So I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.